Picture this. Two ancient humans are sitting across from each other at the edge of a fire, sometime around 40,000 years ago. They are making tools. Specifically, they are knapping flint. The process of striking stone against stone in precise controlled sequences to produce sharp-edged cutting tools that will be used for everything from butchering prey to scraping hides to, in more delicate applications, producing the fine points that go on spear shafts. Watch the one on the left. Right hand holding the hammerstone. Left hand holding the flint core, rotating it, repositioning it between strikes, orienting the platform angle for the next blow. The right hand does the hitting. The left hand does the thinking, the constant, subtle, three-dimensional repositioning that determines where the next flake will detach, how long it will be, what angle it will carry. Neither hand is doing nothing. Neither hand is merely supporting what the other hand does. They are performing different functions simultaneously, coordinated by a brain that has parceled out the task between them in a division of labor so efficient that neither hand could perform the other's role without a complete reorganization of the task. Now watch the one on the right. Same task, same basic setup. Except this person is left-handed, dominant on the opposite side. And the role assignment is reversed. Right hand holding, repositioning, rotating, left hand striking. Both of them are producing functional tools. Both of them are working at comparable speed. And here's the thing that makes this scene interesting rather than simply descriptive. In a group of 20 or 30 ancient people, having both of these individuals present, having a mix of right-handed and left-handed toolmakers, hunters, fighters, caregivers, and foragers, provided the group with something that a uniformly right-handed population could not have. A set of capabilities and perspectives that were, in specific and documentable ways, different from each other in ways that mattered for survival. The question of handedness, why humans have it, what it means, and specifically why the minority left-handed pattern has persisted in the human population across the entire documented span of human existence, rather than being selected out by the disadvantages it imposes in a right-handed majority world, is one of the most deceptively interesting questions in human evolutionary biology. And the answer, when you actually dig into it, reveals something about how ancient human groups worked, how cooperative survival operated at the level of individual skill variation, and why the brain's asymmetrical organization produced outcomes that were good for the species even when they were occasionally inconvenient for the individual. Start with the neurological foundation, because handedness is not simply a behavioral preference that people could switch if they tried hard enough. It is an expression of brain lateralization, the asymmetrical organization of function across the two cerebral hemispheres, that is established early in development, present before birth in some measurable forms, and deeply integrated into the neural architecture underlying language, spatial processing, motor control, and social cognition. The human brain is not symmetrical. The left and right hemispheres, while similar in gross anatomy, are organized differently in terms of which functions they preferentially process. In the majority of right-handed people, language processing is predominantly left hemisphere. Broca's area and Wernicke's area, the primary language production and comprehension regions, are left lateralized. Fine motor control for the dominant hand is also primarily left hemisphere. The motor cortex region controlling the right hand is in the left hemisphere because motor pathways cross at the brainstem. In left-handed people, this lateralization pattern is more variable. Some left-handers have right hemisphere language dominance, others have left hemisphere language dominance like right-handers, and some have bilateral language representation with no strong hemisphere preference. This variability in left-handers is itself significant. Left-handed individuals show greater interhemispheric connectivity, stronger functional connections between the left and right hemispheres in some brain imaging studies, and this greater connectivity appears to correlate with certain cognitive characteristics that show up at the population level in left-hander samples. The integration of information across hemispheres that stronger interhemispheric connectivity enables may produce cognitive profiles that differ from typical right-handed profiles in ways that are sometimes advantageous. But before getting into the specific cognitive and physical advantages, establish the baseline question. Why does left-handedness exist at all in the human population at a consistent frequency of approximately 10%? If the world is built for right-handers, if tools are designed for right-hand use, if social practices favor the right hand, if right-handers have had numerical advantages in social learning contexts for as long as humans have been social learners, then why has natural selection not progressively eliminated the left-handed minority over the tens of thousands of years during which those disadvantages would have been operating? The answer that evolutionary biologists have developed for this question involves the concept of frequency-dependent selection, a form of natural selection where the fitness of a trait depends not on its absolute value but on how common it is in the population. Frequency-dependent selection maintains minority traits when being in the minority itself confers an advantage that disappears if the trait becomes common. And the domain in which being a left-handed minority individual in a right-handed majority population most clearly confers a specific, documentable advantage is one that ancient humans engaged in regularly, and that had direct survival consequences: combat. The fighting advantage of left-handers in a right-handed world is one of the most studied and most consistently demonstrated phenomena in the handedness literature, documented across martial arts, combat sports, and historical records of fighting outcomes. The mechanism is straightforward and elegant. When two right-handed individuals fight each other, both are attacking from and defending against angles and techniques that they have the most experience dealing with because the vast majority of their previous training and fighting experience has been against other right-handers. The attack angles, the defensive responses, the timing patterns, the specific motor programs that get developed through extensive practice against opponents, all of this experience is right-handed opponent experience. When a left-hander fights a right-hander, the right-hander faces an opponent whose attacks come from unfamiliar angles, whose movement patterns are mirrored versions of what the right-hander's neural responses are calibrated to handle, and whose defensive positioning creates openings in locations the right-hander's practiced attack sequences are not optimized to exploit. The left-hander, meanwhile, has extensive experience fighting right-handers, because the vast majority of their opponents have been right-handers, and has therefore calibrated their attack and defense specifically to right-handed opponents in ways that the right-hander has not reciprocally done. This is the fighting frequency advantage of left-handedness in precise terms. Left-handers are specialists against right-handers by virtue of demographic necessity, while right-handers are generalists who have practiced mostly against each other. The advantage disappears if left-handers become common enough that right-handers also accumulate significant experience against them, which is why the frequency-dependent selection model predicts a stable minority rather than either elimination of left-handedness or its spread to majority frequency. The advantage is maximized at approximately the frequency where it is actually observed in human populations. For ancient humans, where combat, both within group conflict resolution and between group competition over resources, territory, and mates, was a recurring feature of social life with direct survival and reproductive consequences. This fighting advantage was not trivial. Ancient individuals who were more likely to succeed in physical confrontations, whether those confrontations were within group dominance disputes or between group violent encounters, had meaningfully better survival and reproductive prospects in environments where physical conflict outcomes affected access to resources and mates. A persistent 10% advantage in combat effectiveness, compounded across a lifetime of social competition in ancient group settings, translates into a real reproductive advantage that natural selection could maintain. Archaeological evidence supports the conclusion that left-handers were present in ancient human populations at approximately modern frequency across a very long time span. The study of ancient stone tools provides one line of evidence. The napping scars on ancient flint tools retain information about the direction of applied force, and statistical analysis of large tool assemblages from ancient sites identifies the proportions of tools made by right-handed versus left-handed nappers. These analyses consistently find approximately 10% left-handed nappers in ancient assemblages, matching modern handedness frequencies and suggesting that the population proportion has been stable across tens of thousands of years. Cave art hand stencils provide another line of evidence. The hand stencil technique, by the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Placing a hand against a cave wall and blowing or spraying pigment around it to create a negative image produces stencils of the non-dominant hand because the dominant hand holds the blowing tube or pigment container. Statistical analysis of hand stencil collections from multiple cave art sites shows a strong left-hand stencil predominance, consistent with a predominantly right-handed population using their dominant right hand to apply pigment around their non-dominant left hand. The small proportion of right-hand stencils in these collections is consistent with the presence of left-handed artists using their dominant left hand to apply pigment around their right hand, again matching modern left-handedness frequency. The cognitive dimension of left-handedness in ancient human populations extends beyond combat advantage into domains that were also relevant to ancient survival and social functioning. The greater interhemispheric connectivity documented in some left-handers has been associated with certain types of problem-solving performance, particularly on tasks requiring the integration of information from different cognitive domains. Tasks where combining spatial and verbal information, or switching flexibly between different processing modes, produces better outcomes than processing within a single mode. In ancient contexts, this cognitive profile could have conferred advantages in specific high-value domains. Navigation, integrating spatial landmarks, directional orientation, and verbal route descriptions into functional wayfinding, is one domain where the kind of integrative processing associated with greater interhemispheric connectivity might produce performance differences. Creative problem-solving under novel conditions, the kind of adaptive thinking required when familiar strategies fail and new approaches must be generated rapidly, is another domain where the cognitive flexibility associated with more bilateral brain organization may produce advantages. Ancient groups that contained individuals with different cognitive profiles, different balances of spatial versus verbal processing, different degrees of hemisphere specialization, different creative problem-solving approaches, had access to a wider range of cognitive strategies than uniformly right-handed, uniformly left hemisphere language dominant groups. The minority cognitive profile of the 10% left-handers in any ancient group added diversity to the group's collective problem-solving repertoire in ways that could matter in the specific situations where the majority approach was insufficient. The tool-use dimension of handedness in ancient groups reveals another layer of functional significance that goes beyond the individual advantage question and into the group coordination question. Ancient humans learned tool-making skills through social transmission, watching more experienced individuals, and replicating their techniques. In a right-handed majority group, the social learning of tool-making was calibrated to right-handed instruction and demonstration. Left-handed learners in this system faced a consistent mirroring challenge. The demonstrations they observed were right-handed demonstrations that they had to mentally flip to apply to their own dominant hand-opposite technique. This mirroring challenge, which left-handed children in right-handed school environments still navigate today, appears to produce in left-handers who successfully manage it a specific kind of spatial reasoning capability, the ability to mentally rotate and mirror complex three-dimensional movement sequences. That is a byproduct of the navigational challenge rather than a direct neurological gift. Left-handed ancient toolmakers who had successfully learned tool-making techniques from right-handed teachers had, in the process, developed strong mental rotation capabilities that could be applied to other spatial problem-solving domains. The division of labor in ancient hunting groups provides another context where handedness variety had functional value. Cooperative hunting of large game required coordinated positioning of multiple hunters around a prey animal, with attack approaches from multiple angles simultaneously. In a group of hunters attacking from multiple directions, having left-handed hunters integrated into the formation created attack vectors from angles that the prey animal's defensive responses were less predictably calibrated to. The mirror image aspect of left-handed attack trajectories produced approach angles that differed systematically from the right-handed majority in ways that could disrupt prey defensive positioning. Beyond hunting, the preparation and processing of animal carcasses at ancient camps involved multiple individuals working simultaneously in close proximity on shared carcasses. Right-handed and left-handed individuals working on opposite sides of a carcass or on alternating sections created complementary working angles that reduced interference between workers and increased the efficiency of collective carcass processing. The practical geometry of cooperative food processing rewarded hand preference diversity in ways that are mundane but real. The social cognition implications of left-handedness in ancient groups are less studied than the motor and combat dimensions, but potentially significant. Handedness appears to be correlated with certain aspects of social information processing, specifically the lateral asymmetry in how social and emotional information is processed. Most people show a left visual field advantage for face recognition and emotional expression reading, a right hemisphere processing advantage for these social signals. Left-handers show more variable lateralization of these social cognitive functions, which in some cases means more bilateral processing of social information, and in other cases means right hemisphere dominance for these functions, as in right-handers, but shifted. The implications for ancient social functioning are speculative, but interesting. If left-handers in some cases process social and emotional information differently from the majority pattern, integrating emotional and analytical social information more bilaterally, or processing social signals in hemisphere combinations that the majority pattern does not use. They may have produced social judgments and social perceptions that differed systematically from those of the right-handed majority in ways that added value to collective social decision-making. Ancient groups making collective decisions about alliances, threats, and social dynamics benefited from the same cognitive diversity principle that applies to other problem-solving domains. The minority cognitive approach adds information that the majority approach does not automatically generate. The persistence of left-handedness across the entire span of documented human history at a remarkably consistent frequency is itself evidence that the trait was being maintained by something more than neutral genetic drift. Neutral drift in a small population tends to either fix traits at high frequency or eliminate them over sufficient time. The consistent 10% frequency of left-handedness across all human populations studied, across archaeological evidence spanning tens of thousands of years, suggests active maintenance by selection, which means the advantages of the trait were consistently outweighing the disadvantages across the full span of ancient human evolution. The disadvantages were real and should not be dismissed in the interest of making the story too tidy. A left-handed ancient human in a group where tools, weapons, and craft techniques were all calibrated for right-handed use faced consistent friction at the interface between their dominant hand preferences and the material culture around them. The social learning challenges discussed above were real costs in time and cognitive effort. In some cooperative physical tasks, working alongside right-handed partners in tight coordination, the mirroring of body orientation created coordination challenges that required active management. But the fighting advantage, the cognitive diversity contribution, the cooperative hunting and processing geometry benefits, and the potential social cognition diversity value together constituted a package of advantages that, at the population level and across the full range of ancient social and survival contexts, was sufficient to maintain the left-handed minority at stable frequency. The math worked out in favor of keeping approximately 1 in 10 people wired the opposite way from the majority, indefinitely across the full span of human existence. What this reveals about ancient human groups more broadly is something worth pausing on. Ancient human groups were not optimized for uniformity. The diversity of individual capabilities, cognitive styles, physical profiles, and skill emphasis within a group was not an accidental feature of the group's composition. It was a functional characteristic that the group's collective performance depended on. The left-hander was one element of a broader pattern of individual variation that made groups more capable than collections of identical individuals would have been. The hunter with extraordinary distance vision contributed something different from the hunter with exceptional tracking ability. The elder with accumulated ecological knowledge contributed something different from the young adult with peak physical capability. The individual with strong social memory for relationship details contributed something different from the individual with strong spatial memory for territorial features. And the left-hander contributed something different from the right-handed majority. In combat, in spatial problem solving, in cooperative work geometry, in the cognitive diversity of collective decision making. Ancient groups that maintained this internal diversity through their social structures, their mate choice patterns, and their integration of varied individual capabilities into collective functioning were groups with broader adaptive repertoires than those that, hypothetically, converged on uniformity. The left-handed minority was one maintained element of a broader diversity package that served ancient human groups in ways that individual-level analysis consistently underestimates. So the next time you notice someone reaching for something with the wrong hand, the hand that is, by majority standards, the weak one, the awkward one, the one that has been the subject of historical attempts at correction across multiple cultures and time periods, consider what that hand represents at the population level. Not a deficiency that survived elimination through oversight, a maintained feature of human biological diversity, preserved across the entire span of human existence because the groups that contained people like that were consistently better off for having them. The hand reaching from the minority side of the distribution has been doing its specific job, in combat, in coordination, in cognitive diversity, for as long as humans have been making tools, hunting animals, fighting rivals, and solving the problems that ancient life consistently generated. It was never the weak hand in any sense that mattered. It was the hand that won the specific fights the majority hand was not prepared for, which is, depending on how you think about evolutionary maintenance, exactly the point.